When Shari was last with us, she was telling us the story, really the adventures, of her uncle who was fighting in World War II and wound up having quite the adventure. And so this was sort of like the perils of Pauline. And we come now to part two, which will be the conclusion of the story. Unless Shari adds something more to it, we have to have her back again on a Friday night, which would not be the most terrible thing in the world. Shari Cassett. Oh, and Ambrose, that's right. Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. Easy to forget. Yeah, you're so forgettable, Ambrose. I'm sorry.
Hi, everyone. So, last time we were following the story of Nat Crandall, my uncle, from the shores of Anzio to the liberation of Dachau to his discharge after VE Day. I shared memories of my family, and I left you with these words. I have one other memory of Uncle Nat. It involves a car trip from New York to Florida, my Aunt Zell's dining room table, and a Torah. Bros and I are back to finish the story and fill in those blanks. Once again, we travel back to Germany. It is near the end of the war. Uncle Nat and his company are making their way towards Nuremberg, Munich, and ultimately Dachau.
Once we were scheduled to take a hill somewhere in the Black Forest. We were already on one hill, but unbeknownst to us, the Germans were also on the hill. We later found out that the Germans had pulled in their crack winter elite troops and brought them into this area. There was snow on the ground. They had on white parkas and no other color to them. These guys were fanatical. We had a terrific firefight there. They had very good firepower. So, both we and the Germans on this hill were surprised that each other was there. So we had a hand-to-hand situation. These guys just kept coming. They wouldn't back down. There were hundreds of bodies left on the ground. The type of aggressiveness that they were showing, well, I never faced that before. By this time, our division was a very experienced division. We were well trained. We killed them all, took the hill.
Uncle Nat and his compatriots were moving rapidly through Germany, living on K rations for days at a time. Those of you who know me know that feeding people is one of the things I love, so I simply had to do some research and find out more about the K ration. The K ration, designed by the Quartermaster Corps, was based on the latest in the new field of food sciences. It came in a wax cardboard box a little bit bigger than a book. It could survive the extremes of heat, cold, and dampness. Inside was soy-enriched hardtack, canned meat or cheese, chocolate or other candy, soup or juice powder, instant coffee, powdered milk, a stick of gum, and cigarettes, complete with a book of matches. Some of those matches carried inspirational slogans or urged soldiers to buy war bonds, but my favorite was the one that featured a stylish young woman on one side, and on the other side carried the warning, VD, simple to pick up. A day's worth of rations weighed 2 pounds, contained approximately 4,000 calories. When you think about it, not much for young men doing hard labor. When the troops had enough time to stop for a full night's sleep and to wash up, a command post was established in the houses of local villages and towns. Uncle Nat, the acting first sergeant, and more importantly, fluent in Yiddish, was given the task of negotiating their arrangements with the Germans.
We got to this particular village. It was a typical country village. I don't remember the village name. Look, when you're in combat, you don't think of these things. Your gut is tied up in knots. If anybody ever tells you they weren't afraid, they're full of baloney. Anyway, whenever we came into contact with the Germans as local residents, I heard from them that they had been told that the American soldiers were horrible, tyrants, that they would rape women, kill children, destroy things, any horrible thing you could think of. It was my job to talk them out of that fear. I said in Yiddish to the Hausfrau, "We're here to get rid of Hitler. That's our main purpose. We have nothing against the normal German people, just the military."
She didn't have much choice but to let them in, but she was particularly hospitable. She was hired to cook and wash for them. After dinner one night, Uncle Nat, the commanding officer, and a few others were talking about what lay ahead when their conversation was interrupted by the woman of the house. In German, she said, "If you will come with me, I have something for you."
She led me to the basement, which had an entryway door through the kitchen floor. There was a stairway down, and you needed a candle because there was no electricity. She came up the stairs. She was not a big bruiser of a lady, and she is lugging up these steep stairs with no handrail, a package wrapped in very used brown wrapping paper.
She put the package on the table, and she said, "This is for you."
I unwrapped the paper, and there were 2 soiled Torahs. No covers, just the 2 Torahs. I couldn't believe it, that here in the middle of combat, all of a sudden, were 2 Torahs. I wanted to get the story from her, so I sat her down and I said, "Tell me how you got these."
Her husband had brought the scrolls home. He was crippled and not fit for regular army service. However, he was conscripted into the organization Tot, along with 1.75 million other Germans. Originally an engineering corps, they soon took over the task of cleaning up in the occupied areas, i.e. looting. In the city of Tarnopol, her husband came across 2 scrolls. Thinking that they might make a good substitute for shoe leather, he somehow brought them home. Tarnopol, located in the Ukraine, was at the outbreak of the war home to 18,000 Jews. When the Nazis arrived, 5,000 were immediately murdered, and the rest were confined to a ghetto, the first in Galicia. During the next 2 years, there were mass murders and deportations to the Belzec death camp. The ghetto was finally liquidated June 20th, 1943, with some resistance from the imprisoned Jewish population. When Tarnopol was liberated by the Soviets, 150 Jews came out of hiding. Our Hausfrau, a devout Catholic, recognized the scrolls as religious documents and refused to desecrate them.
I asked her why she was giving the package to me. She said she was waiting for the right person to come along. "What makes you think I'm the right person?" I asked. "Du bist un Juda. You are a Jew," she answered.
So now my uncle, in the middle of a war zone, had 2 scrolls in his possession.
I couldn't put them on my back, so what could I do?
He was a good soldier. He went to his commanding officer.
So I went to Captain Schroeder. He had his own personal Jeep, and he had gotten hold of a trailer that the Jeep could pull on a hitch. Whatever he saw he liked, he put in the trailer. So I went to him, and I said, "These scrolls are very valuable to me." I told them what they were, the 5 books of Moses, the basis of the Jewish religion. I asked if he would please let me put them in his trailer until we could get somewhere that I could ship them home.
Eventually, the company did arrive at a place where they could send mail. Wrapped in paper recycled from the cook's shipments, Uncle Nat addressed them to Aunt Ruth and left them in the care of the U.S. Army Postal Service.
Truthfully, a lot of stuff went home that way, even though there was an order out, no looting.
But the scrolls came back. Apparently, there weren't any Jews working in the censor's office that day. No one knew what they were, what they said, and the package was marked "Return to Sender." With the help of higher-ups and a little string pulling here and there, the scrolls were once again on their way to New York. Back home, Aunt Ruth was expecting the package, but nothing could prepare her for the power of the presence of these scrolls. In a 1993 interview, she told a reporter, "It was so emotional, actually, to receive them. I could only think, holy, holy, holy." The scrolls were damaged and dirty. My great-grandmother, who kept a strict kosher home, advised her daughter to call the rabbi and arrange for a proper burial. But Aunt Ruth, knowing that Uncle Nat believed in his heart that he had been kept alive through battle after battle solely for the purpose of rescuing these scrolls, would not acquiesce to her mother's wishes. Her sister-in-law discovered that the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City would keep them, which is where these 2 scrolls, a Torah and a rare Haftarah scroll, were stored. In the mid-'70s, Uncle Nat and Ruth and my cousin Wayne, still in high school, did what so many Long Island Jews do. They moved to Florida. It was about 10 years later that I saw the Torah. Who knows? Perhaps it was in the spirit of 2 Jews and 3 synagogues. You know the old joke, these are the shuls we attend, and that is the one whose doors we will not darken. Anyways, my aunt and uncle became involved in the establishment of Temple Beth Zion in Royal Palm Beach. By the mid-'80s, the congregation had built a permanent building, hired Gerald Weiss as their full-time rabbi. It seemed appropriate that the Torah Nat had sent home all these years ago, the Holocaust Torah, become a part of the congregation as well, with a receipt printed some 40 years early proving his ownership of the scrolls. Uncle Nat searched through the archives of the seminary. He recognized them by the ivory and wood spindle on the smaller Haftorah scroll. Rabbi Moshe Klein of Klein Brothers in New York City did the restoration. When he received the Torah for repair, it was missing pages. A few years earlier, Rabbi Klein had collected assorted damaged Torah pages found in the basement of a synagogue in Prague. Looking through them, he found panels that matched the style and size of some of the more severely damaged or missing parts of the Crandall Torah. Thus, the Crandall Torah carries the sparks of tradition and learning from at least 2 and maybe more of the now vanished communities of Europe. It was while Uncle Nat was carrying the Torah from New York to Florida that he stopped for dinner at my Aunt Zell and Uncle Marvin's house in Massapequa, where I was fortunately visiting. After the meal, we cleared the plates, brushed away every crumb, and unrolled the Torah on the long dining room table. I remember staring transfixed at the squiggling black letters. It was the first time I had seen a Torah outside of a temple. Doing so reminded me that our Torahs aren't only objects for ritual and ceremony, but living, breathing documents. Both scrolls were eventually restored. They were used in the B'nai Mitzvot of Ruth and Nat's grandchildren in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Dallas, Texas. The scrolls, which had once belonged to communities that no longer exist except in our collective memories and our hearts, have been given new life in a new land, and to that we can only say, L'chaim. So I thought I would end here tonight on this heartwarming note, but the story isn't quite over. When the video of part 1 of this talk went live, it whipped around from family to cousin to even more distant cousin, knitting us together, if only for a moment. But even stranger, I stumbled into a mystery, just like Nancy Drew. Call it the mystery of the missing Torah. The Haftorah scroll had spent a few years at Beth Emeth in Ann Arbor. When Rick moved west, the scroll went with him. The Torah had not been deeded to Beth Zion in Florida, but lent to them for 99 years. Legal documents had been drawn up, stamped, signed, and recorded. Cousin Bev checked on the Torah from time to time. While researching for tonight's presentation, I attempted to contact Beth Zion, hoping for stories about the Torah's new life. I discovered that the congregation had ceased to exist. Innocently, I wrote to Rick. I'm assuming that since Beth Zion is no longer, you have the Torah, though thinking that it was strange that he hadn't mentioned that.
What? Are you telling me that the Torah is no longer housed at Beth Zion?
A flurry of emails and phone calls crisscrossed the country. Where was the Torah? In the storage unit, we were told. But no, it wasn't in the storage unit. New lawyers were contracted, and Torahgate, as the family dubbed it, was under investigation. In less than 2 weeks, it was determined that the Crandall Torah had been sold to Chabad of West Royal Palm Beach, who had also bought the building. Chabad had disassembled the Torah, and it was in both New York and Israel for restoration. Fortunately, the high-priced lawyer wasn't needed. Chabad fully cooperated, and the transaction was untangled. Any day now, Bev will be retrieving the newly restored scroll. The Sofer in New York added some information to our understanding of the Torah's history, as well as more questions. He said it is a Hasidic Torah from the late 1800s and definitely written in a Romanian-Hungarian style, which is odd considering it was reportedly found in Poland. A traveling scribe, a Polish student of a Hungarian master, a Torah that traveled with a family of scholars from one part of Europe to another? The answer to this piece of the mystery will probably never be known, but the question is ripe for imaginative wonderings. As the latest chapter of the Torah's life was unfolding, I was particularly struck with the importance of our stories, of recording them, retelling them, and sharing them. It is part of what defines our humanity. When the Torah was found, I was moved to tears knowing that it was reunited with its story and that I had a role in this. And for now, that is where the story ends. Again, thank you to Ambrose for his wonderful reading. Thank you all for listening, and especially a very deep thank you to Rabbi Schwab from my family and me, because that led to our discovery of the Torah's latest adventures. Thank you.